Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait. Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you were breaking. We've had enough of all the money you were making.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. The music cut off a little early there. We might bring it back later on. But thanks to Ryan and my brother Wayne McFarlane and other members of the reggae community here in Twin Cities for that song. A song that's appropriate for right now. We're at the beginning of the George Floyd with the trial for Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. A lot of tension in the community here and around the world. And I think our city is wondering how we are going to come out. What must we do so that we fare well and come through this better than we were when we went through it. One of the initiatives to try to address the challenges caused by this question of justice, I call it the reckoning that our country is going through, is the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. It was formerly called the Twin Cities Corporate and Community Coalition, but this is a group that convenes corporate foundations and corporate giving programs to align the work of diversity and inclusion, government affairs, and corporate philanthropy. I'm pleased to have several members and leaders in that organization, that effort, here with me today. I'm expecting James Burrows. He might be here already. If he's not, he'll be here shortly. And Reba Dominensky. James is the Vice President and Chief of Equity and Inclusion at Children's Minnesota. And Reba Dominensky is the Executive Vice President, Chief Social Responsibility Officer, and President of U.S. Bank Foundation. A third person who I know is in the call right now is Lee Anderson, who's Director of Global Issues Management and Public Affairs for General Mills. And Lee, listen, let's you and I start the conversation.
Okay, Al.
Thank you. And there's James.
There's James. Good. And I know Reba's trying to get on as well. She's having a few issues too.
Well, I'm sure she'll be with us in a couple of seconds. Yeah. James and Lee, thank you both for being here. Lee, start off. Talk about this initiative, what it's about, and what you're trying to do.
Well, first off, I apologize. I'm having some camera issues. It's going on and off, it seems. So I'll try and stay on that.
Sure.
But the initiative really did come together after the murder of George Floyd, when so many of our counterparts at different companies based here were talking to each other about our need to respond differently, that our responses in the past were not enough. And we know that. And we know that we need to respond differently and bring a different voice. So James and his counterparts in diversity and inclusion, myself and my counterparts in government and public affairs, and Reba and her counterparts in the philanthropy world, all began having this conversation together. So now you can see the three co-chairs here together And that's really the genesis of why we came together. James or Reba, do you want to add more while I try and figure out my camera?
Well, thanks,
Sure.
Al. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Well, Lee did a great job of doing that. And the thing we wanted to be intentional about is also, too, making sure that this was designed for and with the Black community. We have a lot of organizations that are working on BIPOC issues or Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American issues. We know that George Floyd was murdered on 38th in Chicago. We know that police brutality against the Black community has been a challenge, along with income, along with wealth growth as well. So we intentionally identified our goal and our focus is the Black community and working with them and for them and identifying goals around equity, identifying goals around inclusion, and making it more prosperous for people in the Black community. So we did a great job, I think, of bringing these companies together, but the work has just started, Al, and we're looking forward to working with you and others around this.
Give some more context, if you would, James, and Reba, you might jump in too. In fact, Reba, it was your presentation about this that really piqued my interest. We were at a board meeting. You and I are on the board of Greater Twin Cities United Way, and you specifically talked about this initiative as one that is African American or Black focused. And I told you then, and I say it again now, I was heartened, encouraged by that specificity. Not because it was exclusive or not because it wasn't multicultural by name or design, but because it did, from my point of view, acknowledge a history of not focusing on and following through deeply and extensively to an element of the problems and challenges we face and an ability to blur the lines in a way that nothing happened for anybody and everybody left sort of unsatisfied. So I was encouraged to hear you, Reba, talk about a group of people assembling to specifically address the question of the impact of racism on Black people. Reba, talk about that first of all, and welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Great to see you, Al, and my fellow co-chairs. My apologies that I had a little trouble getting in. Yeah, it was very intentional, this focus on Black Minnesotans. And I think it was based on the circumstances at hand and this acknowledgement that it has been too long that we haven't focused on Black people in our communities. And we knew that if we wanted to do something different, we had to actually come out and have the courage to say, this is about Black Minnesotans. Now, we know that this work will benefit all Minnesotans. Yeah. It'll benefit all of us, but we wanted to be intentional about it. And Al, you can imagine in the early days of the steering committee, and James and Lee can attest to this, there were some tough conversations because there were a lot of people who were sitting at that table who were talking about BIPOC and we're talking about inclusive and how about we use language around all. And, it was really several leaders, including James and other Black leaders who are part of our steering committee who stepped up and said, we can't do that. That will dilute our efforts. What makes this work different is this intentional focus. And people will take notice, like you, when we say these efforts are focused on improving outcomes for Black Minnesotans, because for too long, those efforts and the outcomes we're looking for haven't been in place.
James, talk about that. I mean, it's almost like our experience, our internal conversation, you and me, Black guys, right? When we talk in our fraternities and our social and church and community circles, we have a kind of a private, ambivalent conversation. We understand the strategy of BIPOC. We understand the need to talk about multicultural. We understand and we reflect on the experiences we have that when we've brought issues forward out of our community, we can tell you about the resistance we experienced, right? And that resistance, in a sense, forced the conversation away from the issue that we brought to the table and to a more broadly expansive, set of solutions that ended up taking the focus away from what brought the question forward in the first place. I think our feeling, James, was that if we solve this problem where the cut is the deepest, where the hurt is the greatest, where the pain is the most malicious and enduring, that we, by definition, will begin to solve it across the board for everybody. But we cannot ignore the point of pain that the experience of Black people reflects in our community. James, what do you think? Am I on target?
You're dead on target, Al. I'll try to make it brief, but we talk about 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, when slave ships came and brought people from Africa here as slaves to build this country on their backs, that we were pillaged in our communities, our women were raped, our kids were taken away from each other, we were degraded, and also too that focused into a road into Jim Crow, to the slave codes, to discrimination. All of that can't be ignored. And when you look at that, that's a distinct difference between other communities. It's not better, not worse than Native Americans. It's not better than worse than Latinos or Asians, but it's different. And if you want to create an equitable solution, which we talk a lot about in Minnesota, but I think we've yet to get there, equity means treating each group differently and giving them what they need to be successful. So we're going to say we're going to address people, Black, African descendants of slave, and also Africans who identify themselves as Black. We have to identify what those issues are. We have to look at police brutality and say, before George Floyd, there was Philando Castile. Before Philando Castile, there was Jamar Clark. And I'm not going to go outside of Minnesota. Before that was Marcus Golden. Those are brothers in Minnesota that occurred to. So we got to say, what are we going to do differently there for the Black community? And as Reba said, once we do that, I love it because my Asian brothers and sisters, my Latino brothers and sisters, my natives, they're on board. Native Americans, they say, hey, let's go ahead and get it done for the Black community, and this will help all of us along the way. So Al, that history is something that we teach a lot or acknowledge a lot as part of MBCRE. And I'll be honest with you, it's the first time I've been on a group, and Reba and Lee know this, that I can talk freely on our filter-free Fridays with white people and with East Indian folks and say, you know what, this is what I'm talking about, and just be myself. And we get to a point where we're working towards solutions. Al, sometimes that hadn't happened in this community, and we've all said the right thing and done nothing. This feels different this time around.
I agree. Lee, jump in. And so you're a native of Minneapolis, Twin Cities, Lee. You've got a history of the community. And I want you to, in as much as you're able to and willing to, interweave your presence in this conversation with your personal experiences as an observer of how Minnesota conducts itself and what Minnesota thinks about itself and how that has been both right and wrong at the same time. So any kind of personal commentary that informs where you are right now would be appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Thanks for the question. I do appreciate it because it's a journey, right? We all are on our journey. I come to this conversation recognizing the privilege that I've had, the privilege that my country and Minnesota has given to me, and by the color of my skin, and so I come at it humbly. I come at it recognizing that I don't have all the answers. It's one of the things that I respect most about the work of the Business Coalition is that we established ground rules and principles early on that said we are all going to operate this way because we recognize that we're all coming from different places. And we're very intentional about that. In the policy pillar that I co-lead with Akua Ellis, we actually read one of those principles at the beginning of every meeting so that we're all grounded in how we are working together. So that's really important to me and the work that we do. My experience, I am very active on LGBTQ issues. I was very active on securing marriage equality. I recognize that is a very different struggle than the struggle of Black people. But what I did learn about was organizing the business community and organizing people that have influence and power. And I am excited to bring that experience to this conversation to the Business Coalition. So that's my experience and the way that I approach it. And I'm so thankful that we have a group of people in our business community here that really are approaching it the same way and are grounded in these same values.
I can tell you that General Mills and U.S. Bank have been innovators, have been on the front line. I think everybody would agree that none of us did all we needed to do and could do. We all agree that we all need to do more, but I want to acknowledge that your company in particular has been at the forefront of civic engagement, of encouraging employee and community engagement, and by through the work of great people like Retha Clark King,
Absolutely.
and others who followed her and preceded her. Dave, what was Dave's last name?
Nasby.
Dave Nasby, my buddy, Dave Nasby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You guys have been doing great work, and the same thing's happening with you, Reba, at U.S. Bank. I had a great interview, with your colleague and my friend, Greg Cunningham, a few days ago.
I listened to every word, Al.
I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the intentionality and the specificity that our people, our community, our colleagues are bringing forward right now. James, you've been at this from the very beginning, as an attorney, as an activist, as a business leader, as a corporate leader. And so I think something is afoot, and I call it the reckoning. Where do we go? Where are we going? What's the end game for us right now, James Burrows, as you see it? And Reba, think about this, and also Lee, please think about it.
I think and thank you, Al, for those heartfelt compliments. It means a lot. I've been here almost 30 years next year, and I was like, man, I didn't realize I was going to stay here this long, but the community here has been great to me, and I hope to be great to it. What does it look like in the long run? It looks like this. It looks like us never having to explain why Minnesota is the fourth worst place for Black people to live in this country. It looks like us never having to explain again that we have some of the worst health disparities, education disparities in the nation, and we finish at the bottom 49th to 50th. It looks like us never having to say that our unemployment rate amongst Black people is so high, and even when they get employed, they're not in leadership or executive roles. It looks like that we're going to have actual change to say, at the end of the day, this Minnesota Business Coalition has led through a new lens of looking at philanthropy, a new lens of looking at policy for and with Black people, a new lens of looking at how allyship can work, and it can be an allyship with each other as opposed to you telling me what you want me to do. And it looks at it from a workplace lens of us building a pipeline of young people to take over for us as we retire. I know, Al, you're never going to retire, but at some point I'm going to get out of this game and let the younger folks take over. But it's building that pipeline. So it looks like that. And it looks like it, and us having honest, uncomfortable conversations. I mean, the reason I get so excited about this is a lot of times I've been in rooms before and I got frustrated. I would just walk out because it's like, you don't really want to change. You just want to hear me say what you want me to say. One of my favorite guys on our steering committee, I'm going to give him a shout out, is Charlie Weaver, who's the Minnesota Business Partnership.
Sure.
Charlie and I love each other to death, but we agree to disagree a lot. And at the end of the day, we can talk and say, how are we going to make it better for Black people in Minnesota? And at the end of the day, we can agree to disagree, but still make a change for the best. So I think that's what looks different. And I want to give one more shout out before I turn over my colleagues. James Moman, who used to be at General Mills, their chief diversity officer, and is now the chief equity officer at 3M. This was his brainchild, his catalyst. He thought about this idea, dragged me in kicking and screaming, then dragged Reba in, and pretty sure dragged Lee in. And he started this up, and he's done amazing work in this work on the steering committee. So I wanted to give him his kudos as well.
So Lee, when you and Reba were invited, what was the invitation? What was the vision shared with you? And how have you taken that and molded it into your own motivation and understanding, your lens for co-creating a future that honors your vision, your opportunity, and honors the opportunity for every other human being in community differently?
Well, I'll just say a few words and then Reba can add in. Certainly that we have to behave differently, and we had to respond differently, and we recognize that, and we know that our response and the way that we were addressing these issues was not enough. And so I certainly came at it from a perspective of we need to do more. Fortunately, I'm at a company, General Mills, that definitely believes the same and has made our public commitments to do more and to do things differently. So that's definitely the lens that I was bringing to it. Reba?
Yeah, I think, I'll just add, this work is hard. James, you've been doing it for a long time. Al, you've been doing it, I think, even longer. It can be soul crushing. There are days you just shut your computer down and you say, I can't do this. I need a couple days just to step away and not. But I can't imagine doing anything else. I just can't. In this moment of reckoning, Al, to use your words, I can't imagine any place, any body of work, any people I'd rather do this work with. I was recently at a meeting, a Generation Next meeting. I co-chair their board. And it was a meeting, my CEO was calling. There were like multiple things on my to-do list. And I had a moment of like, I think I'm going to do the welcome at this meeting, and then I'm just going to check out. And in that conversation, the superintendent of St. Paul Public Schools, Dr. Gothard, talked about 3 Black children in St. Paul who just the week before had been killed in different circumstances. And I just thought to myself, why would I ever think I should unplug from this conversation? This is the most important work that we can do right now. And in answer to your previous question to James about what will look different, this is about impact. To his point, we are not going to sit here 5 years from now or 10 years from now and say, oh, look how bad things are for Black people in Minnesota. We have to organize in a way that allows us to achieve a different set of outcomes. And to do that, we have to be courageous. We have to be bold. And I love our filter-free Fridays because I'm going to tell you, I walk away from those conversations smarter. And I can take the things that James and Akua and others say to me, and I can bring them into different rooms and different dialogues. I can talk to my CEO about the perspective that I'm hearing from Black leaders in this community. That is definitely different. Something is afoot for sure.
I'd like to have each of you share one of the principles that you talked about, Lee. Let's hear them. If you got that in front of you, who has it in front of them? The principles you usually start your meetings with. I think that's important to share, how you set the stage for the conversation. And I want to say that I'm going to regard this meeting, this conversation, as a filter-free conversation as well. So I love that. I love being unfiltered and clear. So,
well, I'll throw out one of them. I mentioned humility. That is definitely one, and others can talk about that. But another one I really appreciate and I deeply value is we honor grace in the process. We recognize that we're not going to get it right every time. We are going to make mistakes. We are learning how to work with each other. And we have instilled as a principle grace. There are many times I don't feel that we deserve that grace for each other as human beings, and let alone for me coming to this conversation. So I deeply respect that and value that, because I know I have screwed up and I will screw up as a human. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll just add one of my favorites, and I do have them up in front of me if anyone wants me to go through the list. One of my favorites is finding comfort in the discomfort. And I am finding as a leader, because of being part of this coalition, I'm getting more comfortable being uncomfortable, not just in coalition conversations, but again, in every conversation that I'm in. I feel this inner courage because I channel our Filter-Free Friday into the boardroom at US Bank. And I say, you know what? A year ago, I probably wouldn't have said this, but I'm going to raise my hand and make a comment because the work is that important and the people I do it with are that important. James, do you have a favorite?
Before you do that, Reba, I cannot imagine you not raising your hand, first of all. So for the few years I've known you, I've come to expect you to be brutally honest and consistent and courageous. So go ahead, James.
Yeah, just real quick. My favorite is, one of my favorites is, we will lead with curiosity, honesty, transparency, and humility. And the humility piece gets me because we got to understand that this country was built on the foundation of racism. This country was built upon privilege. in that there is a such thing as white privilege. There is a such thing as systemic racism. There is a such thing as bias that leads towards decisions not leading towards success of Black people. When you lead through humility, you acknowledge that. You don't run from it. You don't say it doesn't exist. And in our steering committee and also in our pillars, we acknowledge that and we move forward with it as well. And we experience that discomfort. So that humility is so important. And I'll be honest with you, Al, what happens too sometimes is Lee and I may get into a little, I call it a kerfuffle, and they know that's my term. Or Rayba and I may get into a kerfuffle, but we're going to talk about it. We're not, and we get off the phone and we still haven't finished it, we're going to call each other up. That didn't happen in this town. It'd be like, well, James got mad at Lee, and then next time he's at the General Mills breakfast a year from now, they got an attitude towards each other. All of that's going. All of that's gone now. So we're going to move forward and hopefully set a model for doing things differently.
So let's talk about deliverables. You're assembling a lot of power of the mind, power of organizations, power of relationships, power of resources and access. To what end? And so we create the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. And what do we do? What do we deliver as the reason for our assembly? Lee, start with you.
Well, I'll speak to advocacy and policy, which is the area that I chair. James mentioned our 4 pillars: policy, philanthropy, workplace, and allyship. In policy, you saw that the business community responded differently last summer than we had before, and we engaged in a conversation we hadn't previously engaged in, police reform. Over 86 CEOs in Minnesota signed a letter organized by our friend James Burrows, thank you, James, calling on the legislature to respond differently and enact police reform. And that happened. And we know that letter was a big part of it. We also know that our CEOs engaged directly in that process to help make that happen. We've channeled that energy into a continued focused effort. This legislative session, we are directly advocating for increased early childhood education resources, increasing money in housing assistance and in internet access, which we saw has been a key problem during COVID for many communities, but the Black community we heard directly from for accessing healthcare and education. We have grounded all of this work in listening to the Black community and bringing together many community leaders to inform us about their needs in these areas and how we can help advance that. So that has been the way that we've been working on it. I don't know if we just lost Al, or hopefully he'll be back. I think we did.
Yep.
And he said, I've had enough.
Yeah, maybe.
It's his show, so hopefully he comes back. So
you're right. It says we're still live, so
yeah. I mean, we're still live. In the meantime, I'll talk about our workplace pillar.
Yeah.
One of the things we want to do is we want to launch careers of Blacks in Minnesota to make sure that we have things like internships that lead into full employment in our employers. So a lot of focus is on developing that pipeline. So working with organizations like Achieve Minneapolis, Right Track, Urban Scholars, those who are doing the work already, to launch that into a workplace. The other piece of it, one of the most important, is career development and growth, to making sure that Black people who get into these companies don't leave after 2 or 3 years, but there is a sponsor, there is someone working with them and leading that work to make sure that they are getting the opportunities to be successful. One of the embarrassing things about Minnesota is we have a very small percentage of Black executives at our Fortune, all of our 80 companies that are involved. We want to make sure that increases by career growth and development. And then the other thing too is we want to benchmark in workplace what other companies are doing and share successes and expand upon those and expand capacity. It used to be a time where, I'm gonna pick on General Mills and US Bank. US Bank may have a great thing about recruiting at the HBCU, and they may have a pipeline from Clark Atlanta, Greg Cunningham's alma mater, or Morehouse College, but we didn't share that knowledge. Now we're going to share it, so we're going to get people from all over the place to come to Minnesota, in addition to recruiting our young people of color here and professionals of color here to make sure they stay in Minnesota. So those are some of the things we're working on as far as deliverables from our pillar.
And I'll just add, what we really want to do is make sure that we have impact as the business community where we can, max out in our lane. So from a philanthropy pillar, which I chair alongside the fabulous Shannon Smith-Jones from Hope Communities, we are focused on a couple of things. One is just intently listening, especially to Black nonprofit leaders and to Black community members with lived experience that should inform the way that we invest in our communities. The second thing is doing an internal review of our own philanthropic policies and practices to ensure that they're driving equitable outcomes. We are doing some things from a Eurocentric point of view that have been kind of the way that philanthropy has run for a long time. It's not serving our Black organizations and our Black community members. And then the last thing I'd say is looking for opportunities to align our funding around the work of systems change. Systems change is one of the least funded areas of philanthropy and one of the most critical when combined with policy, for example. Philanthropy and policy together can lead to systems change. And that's where I get the most excited, is actually the synergies between our pillars and how we work together is where I think we're going to see a lot of change in outcomes.
Definitely.
James, you want to mention the allyship work as well?
Sure. James Moman, we call him JMO, and I'm JB, is doing some great work. It does some great work putting together an allyship framework that's ready to go and up online and running now on our MBCRE website, which is www.mbcre.org, to make sure that allies know how to operate and navigate, make sure that what questions are being asked, what frameworks are being built. And this is something that, as we talked about before, companies have made an investment in. I will say this, that companies not only came to the table, but they've made an dollars investment into this work. So we're producing outcomes in that allyship pillar. I encourage folks who are listening to visit our website, visit the allyship site, and give us any information or feedback that you could use as well. And looks like we got our host back.
Wow.
Yeah. I got kicked backstage. Wonderful technology. So I was actually trying to pull up a chat, and I probably hit the wrong button and lost my screen. But the technology is marvelous.
We kept going.
I know. I mean, I could have just stayed in the back room and listened to this wonderful conversation. It was really good. Yeah. So it's cool. So, where did I leave off? I wanted to ask all of you. We were talking about deliverables, and you mentioned, the 4 areas that you're working in. So, will you be measuring what you do as an organization or what the members do collectively? Will you be how do you keep yourselves accountable, both to yourselves and to the community? What are your thoughts? What are your plans?
Yeah, for every one of our pillars, we have a strategic plan. This is something that General Mills brought us. It was called the OGSM, and I was terrified of it because I didn't know what the acronym meant. But it's really a strategic plan to guide our work. And for every one of our pillars, we have a set of measures and KPIs that we're holding ourselves accountable to. The work that we still have ahead, though, Al and Lee and James, feel free to jump in, is how do we measure that collectively? And anyone who knows a business CEO, I know you know a lot of them, Al, knows that what our CEOs want is a scorecard. They want one scorecard, and they want it to come out quarterly, and they want it to show progress. And we're trying to figure out, what does that regional scorecard look like? And there are some great examples. The Greater MSP Regional Dashboard is a good one. We're also in conversation with Tawana Black at the Center for Economic Inclusion, because I think Tawana and her team has a lot to offer when we think about how to organize ourselves and measure our work. So individually, each of our pillars is measuring the work against a discrete set of KPIs and metrics. But I think we have an opportunity as a region to come together on how do we truly advance this work across the region, and to your point, hold ourselves accountable.
And just to add to that, Al, I think the other thing is we're going to rely upon you and Inside News, Tracy and the spokesman recorder, Harriet Dorf News, Steve Belton at the Urban League, and others in the community to say, is this working? because one of the things we did when we changed the name, we took community out of the name intentionally because we realized that we were focused on business and business solutions to this, but we want to make sure that we're accountable to the community. So I would like this to continue, these kind of interviews, but also too, next time we come, we're bringing data, we're bringing stats to say this is what's done differently. We're bringing stories that sometimes don't work out. We may say there's some companies in our group that haven't been as accountable, and to be quite honest, at some point we need to have the tough discussions. Like, you joined this, you committed to the work, so you don't have the results. How do you need help for us to help you, or are you really committed to this? So those are the kind of things we rely upon you, Al, and others in your profession as well, the community, to keep us connected and keep us honest.
Well, I think, James, if you recall, I think you and I talked a couple of years ago. I think you were involved with this with me. The state's study of the amount of business Minnesota departments and I think maybe 5 or 6 regional governmental authorities were doing with Black and minority businesses, right? And this kind of is the point in case, proves the point. We've had this wonderful sort of pontification, this ability to articulate what should be and to pat ourselves on the back. After all, Minnesota is a healthy state for most Minnesotans, right? High education attainment, excellent health results for most people, wealth, equity. But in each of those areas, education outcomes, the gap is there, the disparity, and the disparity has been consistent and persistent over a generation and beyond that. And so while on the one hand, we may have been advanced in creating a human rights department, human rights initiatives in the state and at the county and city levels, when you look at the data demonstrated that less than 1% of all purchasing in the state of Minnesota was being done with businesses owned by Black people and or communities of color. I think Blacks in particular. You, I think, originated that work, didn't you, James? You were at the center of that, I think.
I was. I picked up while it was there with Alice Roberts Davis, and the number sticks in my head. Out of $2 billion that was spent at the state, $150,000 was being spent with Black-owned businesses, which is unacceptable, appalling, and criminal. So we intentionally, Alice did a great job. She's now the commissioner for the admin department. By the time she's assistant commissioner, we did a great job of raising that 1,400% and investing more in Black businesses. Now, going from 150 to 1,400%.
That sounds like a lot, but it's not. I mean,
so
it went to $1 million or $2 million out of $2 or $3 billion. And so,
out of $2 billion. But I'll say to you this, Al. What we also did was each commissioner now has a metric they're measured by, and they look at that on a regular basis with the governor, or at least when we were there, they did, to identify where you are and where you're spending, where you're not spending. And we had each commissioner commit to spending. It was called I can't think of the name of the program, but they allowed us to allow minority-owned businesses. You could spend with them without doing a bid process. So each of them committed to doing $100,000 per commissioner. Those are systems and things that change the way we look at it. Yeah, the number was still egregious if it's 2 million or 150, but it was headed in the right direction, because for too long, Al, nothing was moving, and people were just making that excuse you talked about. Well, we're trying, we're great Minnesota, maybe they're just not ready. Well, they're very much ready. Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, and hopefully that work is still continuing under Governor Walz and moving forward as well. But that's the kind of thing we want to be held accountable about. We're going to tell you our bad stats as well as our good stats. One of our bad stats is across the board, our board members at all these different companies, we don't have that many Black board members. I can name them probably on one hand. At the end of the day, we need to have more Black board members at U.S. Bank, at General Mills, at Children's Minnesota, at other companies as well, because that lens will help us move forward as well. So definitely hold us accountable.
And so, Reba, I bring this up because I marvel at the passion that you bring to this and the intensity and authenticity that you're bringing to this work, and that your, I believe, voice is a voice that wants to both demonstrate accountability and hold others accountable. But I say to you that the story we're discussing right now has been around for a long time. And from my point of view as an observer, as a kind of outsider, but an observer from an insider inside the Black community, these conversations are not new. And we've had them again and again and again. And what happens too often is that it's the shell game. This is how we look at it. So new people come in and they're dismayed or, amazed or upset with the condition, the experience, and the lack of attention. And they get enthusiastic and they wind up and they commit. But then things happen in life. People get married, they die, they move, they're transferred, and at the end of the day, the problems persist. Nothing substantive has happened. And because that pattern repeats itself again and again and again, the sense is whether this is the intent. I use this example, and it's a criticism. It's fairly harsh. I stand ready to be corrected if it's an unfair criticism. So I'll admit with humility and humbleness that I can be wrong, and I've been wrong before. So I once described former Mayor R.T. Ryback as an operator who, confronting resistance in the community to policy, decided that if you all don't like what I'm doing, I'll find somebody else who does. So a plan to disregard, to disembowel, to ignore, and to invalidate legacy, processes, institutions, leadership in the community that didn't choose to bow at the altar of that configuration of power. And so there's a certain disingenuousness in this relationship. And so at some point in time, we have to have a process, James, that nobody can walk away from and nobody can substitute. If my voice is one you don't like, and this is back to what's the right word for it? Your Fridays, your
Filter-free
Friday. So I love that. I love it, right? So this is about having a filter-free relationship all the time that nobody can escape from. We're in this together, and we have to always be committed to ensuring that everybody else's voice and viewpoint is heard just like I want my voice heard. That has not been the practice from my point of view, not been the story. Again, I could be wrong, but I'm telling you how it looks to me and what I have written about and what I write about right now. And so I'm encouraged by this conversation. But what do you think? What do you say to an Al McFarlane, Reba, about the sense that, there's a hope that this is going to work, but there's also a nagging memory of having been here before and having, I think I was watching an interview with maybe Bill Moyer or someone like that. And I think it was either with one of the great Black writers. I think it was out of Chicago and might have been a Pulitzer or Nobel Prize winner. I can't remember her name right now. So I see the picture. And it was someone on the order of either Gwendolyn Brooks, right? Or Maya Angelou, one of those great women. And the commentator, sort of appreciating her accomplishment, her celebrity, and her ability to move and navigate in the world, right, with ease. And that is a testament to her brilliance. And maybe he suggested it was a testament to a changing environment, that afforded Black people a chance to be themselves, at least her. And he asked her about her white friends. And I just remember the takeaway from the conversation was that in her experience, Black people have to remember that it's not a question of whether you will be betrayed by white people that you trust. It's a question of when you will be betrayed.
Mm.
So that's the nagging feeling I'm talking about. It's a question of not whether the betrayal will happen. It's a question of when it will happen. What will be the trigger for the betrayal this time? And that had to be the feeling of all of those people emancipated by the Civil War, right? Here, we've been enslaved 200 years or some number of years, and now the promise of freedom is at hand. And then the betrayal, Jim Crow. And that pattern persists today. So what do you say, and how can this filter-free conversation we're beginning to have, how can we institutionalize that in all that we do, Lee and Reba and James, so that we are earnestly and intractably committed to this path of resolution, affiliation, of reckoning with our failures as human beings to each other?
Wow, Al, there's a lot there to unpack, but I think so beautifully said. I'll just say a few things and then I'll count on Lee and James to jump in. You know, Al, when we started talking about this work, you and I, you said something to me that has stuck with me so profoundly. You looked right into my eyes and you said, Reba, we can't fail.
That's right. We
can't fail. And you don't know how many times I have channeled that in these conversations we're having on our Filter Free Fridays, this concept of it has been too long. We haven't done enough. We've seen what can't be unseen. We can't fail. So I know I can't speak on behalf of everyone at the table, but I can say for me, it's this willingness to come back, to be humble, to listen, to learn, to take that courage back into all the places I live, with my family, with my CEO, and to make this stick. The other thing I'm going to be really clear about is, and I do this in my work at US Bank on a regular basis, it can never be about me, because Al, you know this, and James and Lee, you know this. Philanthropy can be an incredibly fickle beast, right? One leader leads the foundation and then they leave and the strategy changes and the funding changes and we leave a whole bunch of nonprofits in a really difficult position. So one of the things I've tried to institutionalize into my role at the bank is actually building an equity focus into the systems, the policies, and the practices of the bank. So when I'm no longer there, the policies, the practices, the system is built to drive equitable outcomes. And I actually think that's a lot of the work that we're doing at the coalition. You know, the work that James is leading around workplace is designed to do that, is to make it part of the system. And I am the biggest believer in the need for systems change. This cannot be about the surface. This cannot be about the things that are easy to say and make us feel good to say. It has to be about fundamentally changing systems, policies, and practices. And that's how I think it becomes sustainable. It outlives all of us, but we have to have the courage to stay at the table and to continue to do the work. And the work is not easy, but again, I can't imagine doing anything else.
James, jump in, and Lee, go ahead.
Sure.
So James, this is black man to black man.
Oh, absolutely.
Challenge me if I'm wrong, you know, and not challenge me in a negative way, but just let's bring clarity to this. I want to feel like I'm saying what I'm supposed to say, and I'm asking you as a brother to say, Al, are you real or you're not being real? So that we ground this conversation. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Like I said, I've been up here 30 years, and a lot of times we've talked about doing something different, whether it be a politician, a corporate leader, a school district leader, or school district for a while, and we've come up with the same results. We're at the bottom of the barrel for Black kids, Black parents, Black families, Black people in the workforce. You're absolutely right that we got to hold each other accountable to say this is going to be different. Dr. Brooke Cunningham spoke at one of our grand rounds at Children's recently, and she's at the U, and she talked about you can change the head, and you got to change the heart as well, because you can change the hands about what produces what you're going to do. All of those things have to come together, and in this town, I'll be honest, one of the biggest disappointments I have is I'm from Detroit. I went to law school at DC, with the college in Atlanta, and I've been here 30 years, and black people at the bottom. I consider myself a strong leader, an activist, and then black people get murdered on the street 12 blocks from where I work. You know what? That's enough. And I said to myself, I can't do it alone, but with this partnership here, with this allyship, and I call them not necessarily allies, I call them accomplices, because allies can walk away if we get in trouble and we robbing something or doing something good. Accomplices, you there with me. You're going to get arrested. You're going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble. And arrested for good. We're going to do good, as John Lewis asked us to say, and get in that good trouble. So I think you're right on point, Al. And the thing we're going to need and want from you and others, two of my mentors and favorite people are Dr. Josie Johnson and Mahmoud El-Kati. Every day I wake to do this work, I ask myself, what would they think? What would they think about what I'm doing? How should I be doing it? And the blessed thing is I can call them up and ask them, what do you think around this? And I can call you up. Our elders have to be involved. Our young people have to be involved. And I would say this, we won't please everybody, Al. We won't make sure everybody's not going to be like, oh, the MBCR is great. They're going to be like, well, they're doing the same thing over again. But at the end of the day, can we say, well done, our good and faithful servants to the next generation of folks that come behind us? And I think we can. So you dead on point there. I want to mention the website again. Somebody mentioned they didn't catch it. It's www.mbcre.org. Did I get that right, folks?
Yeah.
Right.
And Al, I know we have to wrap up. I'll just say we mentioned those
before you go. Let me send a note to Kelvin, who's our producer here. Kelvin, get the that video that we started off with ready to close the show with. I wanted to play the entire video, and it's by Minneapolis-based musician Ryan Listman, and he's one of the mentees of my brother Wayne McFarlane from the Ipso Facto days, and it has a lot of great Twin Cities musicians and a powerful message that's totally apropos for this conversation. So when Lee is done and I wrap up, I want to end the program with that music in its entirety. So Lee, go ahead.
Thanks, Al. I was just going to say that I really look forward to us setting clear outcomes and measurements and sharing those with the community. And as James said, you and others holding us accountable to them. We will put those out. We will measure against them. And if we're not making the change we need to make, then we need to be called on it, and we need to re-examine our efforts. That is the hard work that we need to do and that we're committed to.
Okay, well, listen, this has been a great beginning. I know we've got another session scheduled in a couple of weeks. We'll promote that in advance because we're going to go deep with this. I want to tell you, Reba and Lee and James, that what you're doing is so incredibly important, so absolutely necessary. And I think that each of you and the team that you've assembled, my friend Akua and others, gifted, committed, serious, and I know that your honor is at stake. That's what's, and you said it in the right street language, James. Accomplices, right? Everybody here has skin in the game in ways that maybe we haven't had before, and that is a wonderful thing. It's a good thing. That's the source of accountability. And so my last statement here is about what I said earlier. We come to the table not so much with our own voice or only with our own voice, but with a commitment to make sure that every other voice is recognized, acknowledged, and heard, that we look for the power and the passion in each other, and we elevate it, and we insist that we respect and nurture each other's voices, because our own voices are incomplete without the others. That's what I think. So Reba Domensky, Lee Anderson, James Burrows, all members of the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, and leaders in the business and cultural and educational community in Twin Cities. I thank you for being here today. And we're going to come back in a couple of weeks and go deeper into the mechanics of how we make this thing work. Final words, anybody? Lee, final note, or Reba?
Thank you so much, Al. Thank you for being you. And we know that you're going to be here every step of the way with us, helping make sure that we don't fail. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Super. Thank you all so much. I'm Al McFarlane. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll be doing more. We do this every day, actually, every day at 1 o'clock. Let me make one final note here before we close. I want to say happy anniversary to my wife, Bobby Ford McFarlane. We are experiencing, I think, pretty much close to 50 years. Maybe it's 48 for now. We were together before we actually married. So in our feeling, our mind, it's a 50-year anniversary. And I wanted to express my thanks to Bobby for being with me and putting up with me and enabling me to be me. And I want to tell that to the world. So I tell it to you. Thank you. And we'll see you here tomorrow, 1 o'clock. I'm Al McFarlane. Take care.